Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today I'm joined by Imbuter. Today we're here to talk about friction in game design and where that exists in different games and how we feel about it, how the members of our community feel about it, because we have solicited plenty of input from our community members and they've given us their thoughts, which will allow us to formulate our thoughts, because we are coming into this much as we did our platforming video last year, with a goal in mind to discuss friction in games, but not really much of an introduction into it, because we are both trying to work our way through what we feel friction in game design is, how we feel about it, and hopefully we'll come out the other end slightly more enlightened.
I think so.
Yeah, that's the ideal.
Because right now when I think about friction, I'm thinking about heat between my hands, right? But there's some games, Tucker, that we can hold with our hands to try to get out of that physics joke I made that inspired this topic.
Yes.
So hold them up.
And these are two games that came out on the same day, March 22nd, 2024, a day that shall live in infamy. They've been saying this. Many have been saying this. Princess Peach Showtime and Dragon's Dogma 2. I would say two of the most different games that I can think of, just in general, in terms of style, difficulty, appeal, publisher, platform, all of that. This is kind of the Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing New Horizons of this year.
It's a low impact version of that.
much lower impact, yes. But these two games are designed in completely opposite ways, and I think are very good examples of existing on the modern game spectrum, from very, very little friction as just simple and trying to get you through the game as possible, which is Princess Peach Showtime, something that we talked about in our review of this game, and one of the reasons why we didn't particularly gravitate toward it is because it kind of felt like it played itself at times, and there wasn't really anything to grab onto in terms of mechanics. But then, on the other hand, Dragon's Dogma 2, a game that many of the people that we're talking about in terms of their comments today really enjoyed, Aim really enjoyed, is on the exact opposite side of the spectrum. The game is always throwing different things at you, pushing back a little bit, just throwing things in that you don't expect. And that's also part of the reason why I really didn't enjoy it, and I ended up not finishing it by the end of the game, among other reasons. But I think these are good examples of current games. If you're into games discussion, you know kind of what this stands for and what this stands for. And now we're going to talk about basically everything else in between, because we already talked about this game. We might be talking about this game in the future. But there's all sorts of other games that have a different level of friction in them, and we're going to be talking about those today.
We are, but I actually want you to keep talking.
Oh, because me? Wait, but you're talking.
That's true, but I want you to keep talking in a moment, because we owe sort of the framework for this video in large part to our good friend Brendan.
Correct.
Who actually gave us a nice little summation of, to him, what friction means. And, and
well, he's kind of the expert, frankly.
Well, but what I was going to say is because Brendan is one of the smartest people
in existence.
Yeah. This is just
From Big Bang to now, Brendan Hess is up there.
This is just a very good, encompassing statement, I guess. So why don't you read this out?
Well, so when we initially came up with the idea for this video, which was like almost a month ago at this point, I asked Brendan what his definition is, because as someone who, by the way, go subscribe to The Crawl. It's a YouTube channel by him specifically about games that he's into, games I'm not into, which is, there's kind of a Venn diagram, but they're two separate bubbles. And he is someone that really enjoys a game pushing back at him, doing mechanics that you would consider very friction heavy. And so here was the definition he gave us, which is kind of what we're going to be using as our framework for the rest of this video, as defined by friend of the show, Brendan Hess. Friction is anything that resists the player or stands in way of quote-unquote instant gratification. I think that's a good first sentence.
Yeah.
Good job, Brendan. It's a broad umbrella, but some good examples would be Dragon's Dogma. Hey, how about that? Hey, I got that right here. Dragon's Dogma's limited item-dependent fast travel, dropping souls on death in games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, Far Cry 2's gun jamming, Red Dead Redemption 2 immersive elements like making you pack or unpack your horse and watching a slow animation while doing so. Another example being Breath of the Wild's weapon durability and stamina bar, some elements of that game that were heavily talked about by members of our community.
Shout out Regally.
Shout out to Regally. And also Adam Hurd. Adam Hurd talked about it quite a bit. And I believe Bro chimed in.
I just had to shout out Regally whenever I can.
And then the other ones being Etrian Odyssey, making you draw in-game maps, and Metal Gear Solid 3's healing menu. Now, I don't... that's the only one that I have no frame of reference for.
I can explain.
Okay, what do you do with that game?
In Metal Gear Solid 3, when you take damage, Snake's bones break.
What an asshole.
So you have to go into this...
Suck it up.
Yeah. Or his bones will break, he'll get poisoned or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
You have to go into this menu and you have to identify the part of Snake's body that's afflicted, and you have to first put a splint on a broken leg or whatever.
Okay. Go through a lot of
And then you can heal. It is a many-step process to heal in MGS3.
Got it. So what do you think of this? This is mostly a list, but there is a broad definition up at the top, being elements of the game that get in the way of instant gratification.
Yeah.
You think that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think part of what interests me in this discussion and this idea is I feel like often talking about friction, it sort of boils down to, on like an experiential level, things that players don't like.
Yeah.
And I think that this is an interesting thought experiment because I was thinking about, for example, I've been playing Devil May Cry 1 right now. And Devil May Cry 1 is a very hard game, and the only way to earn the only way to like make Dante stronger is to spend red orbs.
Yeah.
The way you earn red orbs is primarily by killing enemies. Mm-hmm. To get more red orbs, you have to kill enemies with a higher style score. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing badly at the game, you're actually going to get better at it slower because you're not going to get all the red orbs you need.
Yeah.
Now, to me, I think that's really cool. I think it incentivizes me to be better, learn the game more. So to me, I guess that you could probably say on some objective level that is an example of friction in game design.
Sure.
But I like it. So it doesn't really register for me.
I don't think that... I think that that's the colloquial definition of when people talk about friction, it's things that annoy them with the game's design that are intended mechanics, but that get in the way of... When he says instant gratification, I think the important distinction is instant gratification is something that is either appealing or not appealing depending on your taste in games. Brendan Hess... And you, in some areas, like Devil May Cry or Dragon's Dogma 2, might enjoy a game that is willing to subvert your expectations and get in the way of what, quote-unquote, what you want to do. If you want to beat the game, if you want to gain experience, if you want to get the next item, something tripping you up on the way to that would be friction, getting in the way. But that can be enjoyable, and I think the reason why the colloquial definition has kind of subsumed the more specific definition that Brandon gave is because most modern players enjoy the instant gratification, and it's frankly why many of them play games. The idea of getting a ton of experience, leveling up very quickly, being able to defeat a bunch of enemies. These are things that appeal greatly to modern gamers, and we see modern games design taking away elements of friction, and in some ways that displeasing certain gamers, but in some ways, and I would put myself in this camp, being something that is very satisfying and engaging on a gameplay design level. And so I disagree in that it's friction is something that people don't like, because it's, if you like friction, then it can be something that appeals to you, and if you don't, then it can be something that pushes you away.
See, but this is, it's not that I disagree with you, but I think I might interpret it differently.
Okay, sure.
Because I actually think that a very big pillar of very, very, very popular video games is friction. Okay. And I'm not giving the example of something like Dragon's Dogma, which is popular in the circles that we're friends with. Yes. I'm talking about a game like Fortnite. Mm-hmm. I think a game like Fortnite is built basically entirely on the idea of delayed gratification. Okay. I think most major video games are built on this idea. Sure. The idea of working through a battle pass is about delayed gratification.
Maybe, yeah.
Ultimately, the reason you can then go and buy V-Bucks, the reason you can, when you buy the Halo Infinite Battle Pass, you can either buy it or you can buy it with 25 levels already instilled, is because...
I didn't know about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, because the design of a lot of these games is not about giving what you want right away. It's about a grind. Grinding is actually, I would say, more prevalent in games now than it ever has been. The ways that you know, going back to playing Destiny and you're trying to get a Gjallarhorn, you're trying to get a Hawkmoon handgun or whatever, you couldn't open up Destiny and just run a strike and get the gun you want. Yeah, there was a lot you had to do.
Something like World of Warcraft, where the rarest weapon is going to take you going through the fucking dungeon. I don't know. I don't play WoW. Do that 200 times to get a tiny little chance.
But this is why I come back to the idea of friction feeling like it's often something we just ascribe to things we don't like. Yeah. Because everybody likes that, enough people like that gear grind and that delayed gratification to where these are the biggest games in the world.
That's actually a great point, and I think that the reason why my mind didn't jump to that is because those are massively popular games. MMOs and mobile games do a lot of that, make you wait or pay
daily
for a lot of things. Or live service games like Destiny, where it is about that loot, it is about the repetition, something like Division. But the reason I didn't jump to that is I don't play almost any of those games. Sure. And so when I think about modern game design, it's mostly single player adventure games, Nintendo, Sony, Capcom. And interestingly enough, I would say that Dragon's Dogma 2 is one of the most friction-heavy modern Capcom games by a significant margin, because they've been trending a lot of their games to be more appealing to more people. Something like Street Fighter 6 adding an easier way for people to get in with a different control scheme. The modern Resident Evil games are significantly easier than the older ones. Even something like Devil May Cry 5 has more options in terms of how you want to approach it than the older DMC games, which you are now experiencing as you're playing DMC 1. And those are the games that frankly, I want to focus on because they're the ones I play. And they're the ones that both of us play the most of. Is things like that dominate that side of modern gaming. Nintendo games, the first party Sony games, those are largely my favorite games. And also like indie games. Most of those games are not about friction. There are, of course, examples where that's not true. But when I think about why last year I loved games like Spider-Man 2 and Pikmin 4 so much, it was explicitly because they felt so smooth to experience. Getting the platinum and 100% completing in Spider-Man 2 and 100% completing Pikmin 4 were just blissful experiences all the way through. I was able to get everything I wanted. I was able to go wherever I wanted. It was just playing through with there wasn't barriers. And to me, that's chef's kiss. That's what I'm looking for. And so, but both those games were critiqued by their the detractors of their audiences, saying, well, Spider-Man 2 is just, it's so easy. There's it's so short and there's no difficulty. Like, that's what, puts it behind other things. And Pikmin 4 certainly had people that were complaining that unlike Pikmin 1 and 2, it is more free form and slower pace and a lot less challenging.
Let's stick with Pikmin for a second.
Sure, yeah.
Because I think Pikmin is a good example.
I didn't prepare Pikmin 4. Imagine I'm holding it.
That's fair.
This is where I would hold my Pikmin 4. Sure. If I had it. I do.
I mean, Pikmin 4 is a really good example, right? Because there's ways where Pikmin 4 objectively is a more player-friendly experience.
Yeah.
The removal of the free aim, for instance, removes a lot of the... I don't necessarily want to say skill or strategy of the combat, because I feel that implies like a hierarchy I'm not trying to imply.
Yeah.
But there is a level of obviously
nuance
of nuance that is lost from that, and of course just being able to turn back like the time.
Yeah.
If you fuck up, like when I got to one of the late game caves and I found the big, she's the bulb orb queen or whatever.
The one rolls. Oh my god.
And when you
I rewinded a couple times on that one.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, when you're playing Pikmin 2 and you encounter her and she smashes all your Pikmin, well then you're fucked unless you reset your GameCube and go back to the start of the day.
Which a lot of people would.
Yeah, I do when I play Pikmin 2. If that thing hits me, I'm just going to reset the GameCube. So you're definitely right that there's a lot being done to trend in that direction. And I think you gave a lot of great examples. I think Street Fighter 6 is a perfect example of this.
Yeah. And that's exactly why that game is one of my favorite fighting games, is because it took away part of the thing that made fighting games so specifically engaging to their core audience, which is the mastery, you have to know all the combos in order to get good enough and understand the game well enough to be competitive. But as someone who just enjoyed the free-form fun nature of Street Fighter 6, adding those more simplified controls allowed me a way in that I have been pushed away by when I played other Street Fighter games, other Mortal Kombat games, Tekken, things like that.
I mean, I think Street Fighter 1 is interesting, right? Because Brendan's mentioning like Far Cry 2 gun jamming.
Yeah.
Brawl tripping is a really good example, right?
It's a notorious one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about fighting games, and you're thinking about starting a fighting game fresh, and if you're not playing Street Fighter 6, all of the various hills you have to climb to understand the game and learn the combos and the inputs for your character and everything. If you see the simplified controls as you do, and I think rightfully so, as a removal of that intrinsic friction in the design, I feel like there's different types of friction.
Yeah, sure.
There's this friction about, getting people to a sense of gratification.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or the removal of friction gets people to a sense of gratification faster, as Brennan is saying. But I think that there's other things like gun jamming or tripping that simply exist to get in the player's way.
Sure.
And I think that's interesting. Like fighting games, I don't think it's necessarily bad design or anti newcomer design or anything, or anti-player, however you want to phrase it, to make the inputs complicated.
Sure.
I mean, I had a ton of fun when I played Guilty Gear Strive.
Yeah.
pretty regularly back when that game came out, actually learning it.
Yeah.
And that was very satisfying to me. But I wasn't playing Guilty Gear Strive thinking, man, Arc System Works really hates me, the player, and they want to put things in my way.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that's another reason why I kind of feel like friction does go back to what you do or don't like.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think there's a big difference, even though I think you're making a good point about it being all useful for your experience. There's a big difference between simplifying the control of Street Fighter and putting tripping and brawl where you just can't get around that. That's just a thing in the game.
No, that's definitely true. And actually, a lot of the examples that Brendan was giving, and I think we'll probably be finding in the comments that we're going to be reading soon. We're getting there. Are the ones that you can't really avoid, that are an intrinsic part of the game's experience, but in some way complicate the moment-to-moment experience of the game. Something like what we were talking about Metal Gear Solid 3's healing. You want to heal Snake. That's the goal.
Right.
In most games, stim pack, med pack, he's healed,
just
get back to the action.
Push the D-pad one direction to be healed.
Metal Gear Solid 3, you go through all these steps. Yeah. Something like what he was talking about with Etrian Odyssey, drawing the map. Most games would just clear the map for you, draw the map, you know where you've been, you know where to go, if you haven't been there yet. But having to draw the map is a part of that game's design, and the goal is to explore the map. Adding an extra step to explore the map is intentional, but it's also unavoidable. I mean, maybe there's an Etrian Odyssey game where you have a normal map. I don't fucking know. I'll never know. But
I mean, this is also an interesting thing next. I think the last kind of broad idea I have before we respond to what people are saying is it necessarily trying to be a pain in the ass to your player to make them draw a map? Or is it necessarily being a pain in the ass to the player to have your weapons break in Breath of the Wild? Mm-hmm. I don't really think so. I feel like if you're thinking about Breath of the Wild, and we'll probably get into it later, but the problem with weapon degradation for a lot of people, really, when you boil it down, is it was the deviation from the norm. Yeah. The norm in a lot of these open world action games is you get your next piece of loot, and it's better, and that's what you use until you get something even better. Yeah. Breath of the Wild subverts that. But it's not just doing so to be a pain in the ass. It's doing so because it's curated this big sandbox with all these different tools for you to use, and it's encouraging you to experiment and do different things in your combat. I don't necessarily know if that's, again, the same as putting tripping and brawl. This is another reason why I just find this to be a really interesting conversation, because I just, again, I can't escape this idea of it being things that people don't like. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that it's... I don't... If the point of Etrian Odyssey is to explore dungeons and go on these adventures that you're directing, it's just in the spirit of that to have you draw your own map.
Sure. Yes and no. Because I think that, again, it comes back to... Obviously, you're putting this through the lens of if you like it or don't. Yeah. But I think that ultimately might end up becoming so vague and malleable to where it's almost not useful in my mind, because then if let's just use tripping in Brawl as you have been as the ultimate example of something that was included in the game that I don't think anyone prefers. Anyone doesn't. I don't think anyone likes that being in the game over 4 or Ultimate or Melee or whatever. But clearly Sakurai thought it was was a good idea to include in the game. I believe, and I'm pulling this out of like Smash 4 era me reading articles. I believe the intention was for it to be a unifying force of like balancing the playing field of no matter how good you get at the game, there's some elements of the game that you can't overcome that put you on a similar playing field to lower level players. Yeah. So I think we can put that on the far end of basically no one likes except for Masahiro Sakurai. Yeah. But I do think that something like Breath of the Wild's weapon degradation, which I agree with you. I like its implementation. I think that that is a very bold and distinct choice that personally for me, if it wasn't a detriment to my enjoyment. And it might have helped. I mean, I don't really know. I never played Breath of the Wild without weapon degradation, so I wouldn't know. Right. But that is one where people who don't like it find it one of the most friction-full elements of recent games design. I mean, that was probably the thing that was most discussed when we brought up this topic, and people spun off into larger conversations, is that there are some people in our community that feel that it is just a complete hindrance to the flow of combat, to the exploration, to the reward of discovering something. And I don't agree with that, but I can understand it. But whereas you and I enjoy it, it is for me, almost a non-factor for Breath of the Wild. I'm like,
sure,
yeah, that happens. Yeah.
No, I completely hear you, but I guess what I'm trying to raise is, are they not just annoyed by a design choice they don't like?
Yeah.
The example I give, to bring it to Princess Peach Showtime for a minute, me, when I'm talking about how I don't like how the game takes away control for these auto parries and things, I just don't like that.
Yeah.
That's not... What I guess what I'm trying to poorly articulate is I feel like there's an ascription of dislike to friction that should just be an ascription of dislike to a design decision you don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I just think that a game like Breath of the Wild has an intent.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why the weapons break. Mm-hmm. Because that's a cycle of combat.
Yeah.
And the reason people don't like it is because it's
also
not what happened in The Witcher.
The blight, like the game blight has actually...
it's just not the way that you play The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Or the way you were playing Horizon.
Yeah.
I guess that's my what I need to still understand better.
Sure.
I just don't feel like inherently these are decisions made to screw the player over.
Sure. Well, here's my question.
Yeah.
Where did you get that was the definition of friction? Because I don't think I've expressed that, and I don't think that was necessarily in... I mean, obviously, Brendan wouldn't agree with that.
Sure.
But I don't think that friction equals negative. It might equal negative in large part for me, because a lot of elements that people consider elements of friction in design, I usually dislike, and then would bristle at if they were presented to me. I would, like the spike ability in Kirby.
Sure.
I would do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there is that correlation. I think, again, going back to that might be the colloquial definition of when people say friction, it might be things that annoy them or design decisions that they don't agree with. But I don't think that's necessarily true, and it's certainly not how I'm presenting this conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like maybe I just don't understand. I mean, maybe I'm just dumb. But I guess... Well, that's a given, right? But... anything that resists a player stands in the way of instant gratification. I guess part of my issue is, doesn't everything stand in the way of the player and instant gratification? If you're playing Mario and the goal is to beat the stage, every block that's in your way between the start of the level and the end of the level is then friction.
Yeah.
Right? Or no?
No, I wouldn't say so, because I would say that the instant gratification of playing Mario is... part of why that series is so enduring and so popular is the sheer joy of moving a character with those physics that have been so fine-tuned. That's the gratification. Bouncing off of a Goomba and getting a one-up, punching a coin block, getting a little ding, collecting coins, watching your score go up. Those are things that are the instant gratification of Mario.
Sure.
Whereas in Far Cry 2, gun jamming, you want to shoot the gun.
Sure.
The game is not letting you shoot the gun in that moment. You want to, Etrian Odyssey, you want to explore the map. You have to do an extra step to get to exploring the map. But I think that usually the instant gratification is something that is more intrinsic to the game's just general moment-to-moment gameplay, to where an element of friction disrupts that in some way. So it's not disrupting the flow of playing Mario to put a block in the way. That is Mario. That is the default state of playing Mario. And actually, I think a good example would be, for me, game overs, like true game overs in the older Mario games, of losing all your lives and restarting from the beginning of the game, just because there's a limited number of lives and you just have to start over. There's no choice.
Yeah.
To me, that is friction that decreases my enjoyment, whereas something like Wonder, obviously I'd just start from the checkpoint or the beginning of the level or whatever, and that, to me, the goal is to play the game more and continue forward progress.
Yeah.
But limited lives means that I have to restart from square one on Mario 1 once I've lost all my lives in World 5 or whatever.
I hear you, and I think you're probably right. I guess ultimately what I just have trouble with is that there are no games that instantly gratify you.
Sure, I mean...
by nature of, when you're playing Mario, the goal is to rescue Peach. If the game gratified you instantly, you'd walk from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, you rescue Peach.
Yeah.
I'm talking about on a very fundamental level here.
Sure.
And I'm just trying to work my way into what the concept really is.
Yeah.
Because if you're thinking about the idea of resisting the player, sure, I think you can make a good argument that you're not putting anything in front of the player is intrinsically resistant to play, so it's not useful to call out. But also, like, I don't know if I would consider there being a live system in a game to be friction. I think that's just the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. Like, when you're playing Monopoly, you have to wait for your turn to roll the dice. Yeah. That's not friction. That's just the game doesn't work if you don't follow the rules.
Well, I mean...
Yeah. But what
there's a lot of versions of Monopoly out there.
Sure. And there's like a credit card Monopoly. Who knows how you play that one? But, like, if you're thinking about Mario Brothers, and you're trying to have me come up with what is an example, if I can't just simply say the presence of a pit is friction, what would I say is friction?
Okay, fine.
I would probably say that finding a reverse warp zone in the last levels is friction.
Sure.
And that's a negative thing.
Yeah.
And that's mean. Mm-hmm. The last level is full of really mean stuff.
Sure.
And I think Dragon's Dogma is also full of mean stuff.
Sure.
I think the fact that when you take damage, you can't recover all of the damage is mean to the player. Yeah. And that is a punishment to the player.
Sure.
I don't think the fact that I have to walk across the map very deliberately and plan my route very deliberately is friction in that same way.
Sure, yeah.
It's not that Again, it's this idea of resistance, I think, is inherently negative.
Sure.
Now you can have fun in negativity. That's what BDSM is all about.
Absolutely.
All about enjoying pain, right? But what I'm saying is, I just think that there is... I guess maybe I take issue with Brendan's premise of rejecting instant gratification.
Sure.
Because I don't think... I just don't think there are games that instantly gratify people, really. And I just don't necessarily feel like...
So you're telling me you start Star Fox and you're not instantly happy?
I'm instantly happy
whenever
I look at the box of Star Fox. But it's not about instant happiness, it's about instant gratification.
Yeah.
And Slippy takes a while to gratify me. But I think I guess and this is, we ought to stop waffling at a certain point. But I guess
the point of the video is to waffle.
I guess I just don't agree with the premise that a decision like weapon durability is inherently frictionful.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think it's an example of deviation from the norm, and maybe that's a better way to frame friction. Sure. I don't know.
I would actually yes say that is true in some regards, because that's also true of tripping and brawl. You're playing a fighting game. You're playing a Smash 64. You're playing a Smash Melee. You get to brawl. You're not expecting tripping to happen, and then tripping happens. Like, huh? But if tripping had happened from Smash 64 and that was just the thing that happened in Smash Brothers, but you still enjoyed Smash Brothers, it wouldn't have been weird in Brawl. And I can't say if it would or wouldn't have still annoyed people, but it certainly would have annoyed them a lot less because they would have known to expect it. And you said something very similar about Breath of the Wild. The weapon degradation is just a deviation from the norm. Or we were, without saying this as explicitly as we are now, that's what we were talking about with Metal Gear Solid 3. Almost every other game, you press a button and you're healed. You got to go through all the steps, and that's not inherently bad. It's just different from 99.9% of other games in a similar genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
read a comment.
We got a couple of comments from other people, and let's start with Adam Hurd, who says, I think friction, as in something that stands in the way of the player to prevent them from instant gratification. Don't shout.
Okay.
I know you don't like that one, but can be cool as hell, so long as it's something that makes sense to the world, but also enhances the gameplay. From some of the examples you've given, again, going off of the list that Brendan provided, then I provided to everyone else, because I'm a lazy bastard, like souls dropping on death, which actually we haven't really talked about, but that's a big one. I find that more annoying because I need to farm more souls to get where I was. It becomes an annoyance and a burden. Excuse me. Something like drawing the map on Etrian Odyssey is part of what makes that game cathartic. It ends up in building up to more of a gratifying solution when you finish the map. Basically, getting in the way of gameplay is a big issue, and it's something I think is usually done badly or in a way that frustrates the player instead of makes the player engage with the title in different ways. This is a pretty good summation of actually everything we've been talking about up to this point. But Adam does, I think, come down more onto what you were talking about in terms of feeling like friction is usually the things that annoy you with a game's design.
A game that doesn't have a lot of physics defined friction, but a lot of friction in the sense that we're using it.
Marble Madness?
I was gonna say monkey ball.
All right.
So very,
actually very similar.
So very close.
Yeah.
And I like this idea here, this idea of catharsis.
Sure.
I took my glasses off. I should put this back on.
Well, you know the word.
Well, because Tucker, just to pull the curtain back here, Tucker has pasted these comments into a Google Doc.
Yeah.
But he didn't remove formatting.
Well, I tried. Look, I don't know how to remove the background. It's not working like I tried the thing. It doesn't work. I don't know. I tried.
We'll litigate this another time, but the point is I have to read white text off of like a very dark gray background. Yes. But I think the place that I agree the most with this idea of I think part of my issue is I was looking at instant gratification on maybe too big of a scale.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about a game like Monkey Ball,
yeah,
because I replayed Monkey Ball Deluxe recently and I loved it, and it's interesting because it's such a different game than Banana Mania, and it's not only because the physics of Banana Mania are just the physics of Banana Blitz.
Yeah,
it's also because you can jump, and the ability to jump totally breaks the level design, and I think it's very fun that you can break the level design. Yeah. But when you go back and you play the originals, and you have to really sit with the levels, the delayed gratification comes from the fact that you're going to fuck up a lot of times.
Sure.
And now, again, I think that that's just the nature of a skill-based game. Now, there's plenty of horse shit in Monkey Ball. Let's not pretend that that's not true. But I guess I just still wonder, is the inherent fact that I'm not immediately good at a game and the delayed gratification of improving my skill comes later,
sure,
does that mean that it's a friction-heavy game? I don't really know. I don't really know.
Yeah, I think that it's a scale for me. And I think that scale usually ends up on the side of, as we actually were talking about in one of our more recent videos about skill in game design, landing on the side of, if the skill floor is high, I would consider that immense friction. Of, if the game is helping you to learn its mechanics, I would consider that a decrease in friction, giving you easier levels to start off with, building up momentum, having tutorials that really walk you through specific things in order to then combine those to have a mastery over the mechanics. I would say that lacking in those is pretty high friction. And so when I'm playing something like Rollerdrome, again, that we talked about a couple of years ago, part of the reason why that game, or even Penny's Big Breakaway, which we just talked about in the last video, those games don't appeal to me is because there is so much friction to get to the enjoyable part of the game, which to me is the exploration, is the flow. I feel no sense of flow from the beginning, and it's very difficult to overcome that obstacle for myself. And I would consider that pretty significant friction, even if just because I'm not going to say for Rollerdrome or Penny's Big Breakaway that I could never enjoy those games because of their controls, but because their onboarding is very steep. They have a very high skill floor, and if there had been strides made in terms of earlier level design and better tutorials to teach me the things that would then allow me to continue forward into the game, that would have made me enjoy the games a lot more, and I probably would have actually played through both of them, which I didn't end up doing. So that's, I think, a very specific type of friction that impacts me in a very specific way. But I would consider lacking tutorial, lacking options, lacking an ease to be a type of friction.
Well, it's interesting because then I think you have to wonder why, right? And also, shut up, Rule 7. I'm wearing a Rule 7 shirt today. Can you see a logo on here somewhere?
He's wearing an Ollie Ollie World shirt.
I'm wearing Ollie Ollie World.
Ollie Ollie.
Shout out Rule 7. Now, shout out Rule 7, but the tutorial in Rollerdrome is not very good.
Yeah.
Right? But then I think that begs the question, right? Is it friction, or is it the fact that they just didn't build a good enough tutorial?
Sure.
Because what you're explaining, I think, to some point, or to some extent, is the idea that the game is not helping you get into it.
Yeah.
But in reality, this is not me commenting on your inability to play these games. But Rollerdrome is a pretty simple game when you actually play it.
Sure.
Like the mechanics are pretty simple. It's very well defined. Mm-hmm. The question is whether you're able to get on the train. Yeah. Once you're on the train, you're zooming along the tracks. To me, I think that's maybe just an example of the fact that they needed to do a little bit more work and maybe play test with some different groups of people to learn that we need a little more of a gentle on-ramp. Yeah. Monkey Ball, by contrast, has everything you're talking about. Yeah. The first Monkey Ball levels are just very simple. Yeah, of course. And they're very wide, and the game progresses in difficulty over time. And even in Monkey Ball Deluxe's story mode, you don't have to beat all the levels. Yeah. You can pick and choose ones you want. Mm. So it makes me wonder if what you're talking about is in some ways just not great onboarding opposed to friction.
Yeah. Well, I think that this was just kind of making me think about where I feel games help or don't help you being a element of experiential friction. Again, we're talking about a term that I'm getting more confused now. I thought I was the one like trying to teach you, and now I'm all kerfuffled. But a game helping you or not, I think, is an element of friction. There is no assistance in something like Etrian Odyssey to exploring the map. You have to manually do that, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I can't comment if I would enjoy it or not. But there is no assistance there. And something like Street Fighter 2, older Street Fighter games, they'll tell you on the little loading screen, okay, A is a light punch or whatever. Yeah. But there is no assistance to teaching you that game necessarily. Whereas a lot of my favorite games have that onboarding where it starts very slow, and I never feel like I almost never feel like I'm learning the game because it's just happening to me, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate when games provide assistance and give me an extra life or whatever it is, as opposed to doing things that are that aren't helping me. Yeah, that assistance is something that I would consider anti-friction.
Well, it's interesting because the more I think about Street Fighter, the less I feel like it's necessarily a good example. Okay, sure. Because if you want to get better at Street Fighter, well, you should just go to the training mode. Yeah. Where it shows you your combo trees and everything, and you can be there as long as you want to learn the game. Is it possible that, again, another thing that we're conflating in the tangle of what friction is or isn't is hand-holding? Sure. Because
I would say pretty explicitly, hand-holding is anti-friction. Sure. No matter what we define friction as, if the game is holding your hand through it, and that's something that people criticize a lot of games for, that is, I think that can be pretty explicitly said. If there's a Venn diagram of mechanics, some of them are friction, some of them aren't. When a game is holding your hand through sections and assisting you, it is outside of the bubble of friction.
Let's think about Penny's Big Breakaway also, because I think it's a really interesting example. Sure. Obviously, the Christian Whitehead coming from Sonic Mania, coming from these games that are very simple. Sonic is a very simple one-button platformer. I think part of what I find so compelling about what Evening Star did with Penny's Big Breakaway is it is like the hyper antithesis of Sonic in a lot of ways. Yeah. It shares a lot of the underlying principles. All the underlying principles of momentum are the same. But the game...
Funny guys.
There's a lot of funny guys. A lot of colors. A lot of animals.
Penny Big Breakaway's levels, if they were in 2D, I think they'd be more like Sonic CD levels. Because it's just horse shit.
I think you're right.
They're just like flashing colors and like, wah!
It's designed in a way that is alienating to players. Sure. And I think that's a good example of a game that is definitely friction heavy. Yeah. Because I feel like if you look at this meta-narrative about what Christian Whitehead did before, there's a very clear decision being made here to make something that is intrinsically more niche, that is intrinsically harder to learn, that is not that interested in onboarding. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good example. Again, has very heavy friction. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, there's really no assist options. Either you get better at the game or you don't.
Mm-hmm. Now let's jump over to what Brogan Chatton here says, and he says friction is conflict's evil twin brother. That's the title of this video. It's not going to get any clicks. No one's going to be searching that. That'd be terrible for SEO. He says...
Usually we got a ton of SEO.
Nope. He says, conflict is naturally in most stories. And when a game is meant to be a challenge and to be won... What? And when a game is meant to challenge and be won...
It's talking about it's meant to challenge you.
And then to be over... Okay, fine. It becomes much more essential. Yeah. So we get enemies and obstacles. There you go, Mario.
This first.
Friction produces conflict and at the best of times enhances the core design. Not all game elements are meant to be fun. Games shouldn't be obligated to be fun in the first place, nor should they be obligated to have victory conditions or real obstacles either, but that's a different conversation. The good examples listed by you all were deliberate choices made to enhance or create the experience. The best way to come to terms with these player-hostile elements is to realize what they affect and how they are meant to make a player feel and behave. Do we want to keep going, or
I think that's great.
Okay, great.
I think
there's like another double part of this.
Yeah,
and then another second.
I agree with that.
Yes.
What I love about our Discord server is that we have really thoughtful conversations.
Yes.
What's not so great about translating them into videos is that everybody writes too much.
Yes.
But that ultimately doesn't matter here.
We need to do better. I need to do better at tuckaways.
Yeah, really, it's on us.
Yes, because it definitely is.
Again,
neither of us really read through these.
No,
that's a problem.
No, all of these were just, again, copied and pasted into Google documents.
Yes, and even would you consider that friction? Spirit. Would you consider me not pasting it right to be friction? It's getting away with your instant gratification.
I think it's more that you're just a bonehead.
Okay.
But no, I really like what Bro is saying here, because this is, again, what I feel like I was striking at here.
Yeah.
See, a good example of friction is you tabbing away from the thing I was reading. Oh,
sorry. I was just seeing how long the video's been going.
I really like this phrase here. The best way to come to terms with these player hostile elements is to realize what effect they have and how they're meant to make a player feel and behave.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I feel like Bro is doing a great job of reframing.
Sure.
In my head a little bit, my issue I was having.
Yeah.
I like this idea here of player hostile.
Sure.
Because I think that's a better way to put it. Because again, with the Street Fighter example, I think that Street Fighter is sort of player ambivalent.
Sure.
Because it just, here's a set of controls.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the same playing field.
Mm-hmm.
This is a PvP game.
Yeah.
All you need to do is learn the controls better than the person you're playing against.
That's true.
It's a neutral playing ground.
Yeah.
Now you can say that what's the opposite of hostile? Like, it's friendly?
Yeah.
Player friendly. Street Fighter 6 is player friendly.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say Street Fighter 2 is player hostile.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that it's really just technically by comparison, and you can't even really make that comparison until something like Street Fighter 6 is introduced into the conversation.
Yeah.
Of if up until Street Fighter 6, and I know this is a reductive framing of this, but if up until Street Fighter 6 every fighting game was just learn the controls, you fucking dickhead, then there's no question of if it's friction or hostile or not, because that's just how the games are. But once we've played Street Fighter 6 and really enjoyed it, I would say probably collectively or probably individually, it's one of our favorite fighting games. That to me, in a certain way, reframes older Street Fighter games, other fighting games, as more frictionful / more player hostile, because I know that there is the option to design them to explicitly be more player friendly. It is absolutely true, much like we were saying with hand holding, that Street Fighter 6 is more player friendly than the other games. It teaches itself to you better, it gives you more options, and then by extension, the other ones, to me, feel like they have a lot more friction in their design.
Let's have an honest moment here.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're not having any honest moments.
Okay, I've been lying the whole time. Wink. One of us lies, one of us always tells to lie. Both of us lie.
Let's have an honest moment here.
Okay.
The reason that the Street Fighter 6 controls are good is because neither you nor I want to put in the time to play Street Fighter properly. Yeah. So I think this is an important dimension of the conversation. Totally. Because what again, I'm going to hammer in here on the idea of behavior. Again, this is
you didn't find it, but
I found it here. Behave, Austin Powers, and Super Smash Hall. Bro is always making a fucking banger point here. Again, I'll go back. Let me go back to Devil May Cry again.
Sure.
The more we talk about this, the more obvious it appears to me that it is an example of clear frictionful design to have the red orbs be gated behind your style ranking.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming very obvious to me the more we have this conversation. The behavior that's cultivating in me is one of an attention. Sorry, I'm drinking milk.
Yeah.
Of an attention to detail. I have to have a greater attention to detail of Dante's positioning. I need to pay greater attention to the enemies I'm fighting. I need to pay greater attention to my literal dexterity.
Yeah.
As I'm playing the game, it is forcing me to play a certain way.
Yeah.
If I were playing the game on easy auto, I wouldn't have to think about any of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the reason that easy auto is cool is because you don't have to worry about any of this shit.
Yeah. And that's how I played that game.
Yeah.
And was able to beat it.
And again, I feel like I have to keep making apologies. Brendan, I apologize to you next. Because this is a good example of...
But did you apologize to first? Just to make sure we get this on record.
I was apologizing to the audience for improperly describing my thoughts on Devil May Cry.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Next up, Brendan.
The instant gratification point is made clear here.
Sure.
Because easy auto is instantly gratifying.
Yeah.
When I played DMC5, I played on easy auto a little bit. I'm like, this is fucking cool. And then I turned it off. Because for me, and to go to the very last thing Bro said, do I like friction just enough to feel and appreciate the conflict that's there?
Yeah.
When I was playing DMC5 on easy auto, I didn't appreciate the conflict.
Sure.
And the reason I'm not playing DMC1 on easy auto is because even if it kicks my teeth in and it takes me a week to get good enough to beat Devil May Cry 1, I appreciate the challenge being put in front of me.
Yeah.
I have no interest in the challenge of learning how to play Street Fighter.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that there's no doubt a component of friction. A component of friction is patience and impatience.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah.
And I think that we are both very impatient gamers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting way to frame a lot of these things, because there are a lot of these elements that we're talking about that, again, it's about delaying that. It's about adding the extra steps that can be enjoyed and certainly are enjoyed by many people. But, and again, it comes to taste.
Yeah.
But add steps to kind of what the goal is of beating up the enemy, of seeing the end of the level, of healing yourself, of exploring the map, whatever it is. Murph says, I'm reminded, on the topic of friction, just to make that clear.
We're gonna start reading non sequiturs in this video.
Just start reading like a news article. I'm reminded of a GDC talk where one of the devs of the original game Thief was talking about how stealth was challenging, but the combat was even harder. He begged the designers to make the combat easier so he wouldn't have to do the stealth, and was met with a response of no. The game is about sneaking around. If the combat was easy, then players wouldn't sneak around. To me, that's what the core philosophy of friction in games should be. It's there as a proverbial boundary to the players to get them to play a game a certain way, and therefore see the devs' intended experience. They could have not had combat in Thief at all, just made it so you get a game over on being detected, but then all you would see is a challenging stealth. By giving an option of combat that's really hard and finicky, the player feels empowered by choosing to sneak around encounters.
It's a really good example.
It's really interesting. I think that this is a very specific comment, and I have not played Thief, so I can't necessarily. I mean, I think what he said makes sense. I can imagine. I can imagine hard combat. The power of the human mind is on display, ladies and gentlemen. But I think this is a very different type of friction from many of the other things that we've saying, because what he's talking about here with the largely binary choice in Thief of are you being stealthy or are you doing combat, and one of those being the way the game was meant to be played, one that wasn't, but is an option if you're really good at it or whatever, is I think different from a lot of things we've been talking about that are baked into the base progression of a game. When you're playing Breath of the Wild, when you're playing Brawl, when you're playing Metal Gear, when you're playing Etrian Odyssey, you can't avoid not healing yourself. You can't avoid tripping. You can't avoid drawing the map. I don't really know how Etrian Odyssey is. Maybe there's a map online. I don't know how it works. No, it doesn't make sense. But whatever. Almost everything that we've been talking about are unavoidable. Yeah. Whereas in Thief, the friction comes from another element of the game being so frictionful that you want to avoid it. The goal is to avoid it, and then by extension, experience the intended path or gameplay style of the game. But I think it's different because these seem to be separate pillars, one being more frictionful and the other being less, and then that by design steering the player in a certain way because they want to avoid the higher friction environment.
don't know. I don't really see them as different. Because it's what we're saying about Breath of the Wild, right? I mean, the breaking of the weapons is there to encourage you to experiment in in how you approach combat.
Yeah, sure, but you can't avoid that.
Yeah, but you could use a Master Sword. You could fight.
Not for most of the game.
You could then how about this? You could fight using only remote bombs.
I guess that's true. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but you're not going to do that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah,
yeah. You could play by being very, 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 very hoarderly with your items and just using your swords so they don't quite break.
You're right. I think the only one that is literally unavoidable would be what we said in Brawl, tripping, because Etrian Odyssey. I don't know if it's a good example, but I'm imagining Etrian Odyssey is an option to do your map or not. If you don't do the map, you're stumbling around in the dark.
Yeah.
You don't know where you've been. You don't know where you're going. That is a harder experience than drawing the map for yourself. And so you're right. It is technically optional. Well, you can play Metal Gear Solid 3 on basically hardcore mode where you have one health bar and that's it.
Or let's give an example of a game we both played. Last of Us.
Sure.
When you're getting to the end of the game and you're soon going to arrive at the hospital, you're in like the sewers.
Yeah.
It's like after the giraffe part, and there's so many bloaters and shit in this sewer. You can run straight at them and fight them and try to get through, but you're gonna get fucking murdered.
Yeah.
No matter what difficulty you're playing on. The Last of Us offers a lot of combat scenarios where you could just go in and start shooting, but you're not going to have the ammo for that. Or if you do, you're going to be scraping by skin your teeth and you're going to be fucking cracking a guy's skull open with a brick to beat the encounter. What the game is doing is it's goading you back towards a more conservative play style, where you're ducking in and out of combat or out of cover and stealth and everything. So I think it's a good example.
Yeah, he has another thing here that I just want to read because I did read this part earlier, and I think it's good. Sure. Players are dumb and easily spooked animals, and sometimes you have to trick them into having new kinds of fun. Not that friction is always good, mainly because not all devs are good at this trick. Sometimes it has to be an all-or-nothing approach. Either the game is so full of friction that you accept it for what it is, games like Fear and Hunger, Outer Wilds, Pathologic, etc., or it's a game with fun combat/traversal/narrative, and then a really unfun mechanic that brings the experience down. And I think that is kind of the spectrum that we were talking about at the very beginning of this video, from Princess Peach Showtime to Dragon's Dogma 2. And I don't think Dragon's Dogma 2 is all the way on the friction side of the spectrum, but that there are games that exist on different levels of this, and to the point of something like Outer Wilds, which is a highly revered game. That game is full of just nonsense, and you figure it out, screw you, learn the language, figure out the really difficult control, the ship controls. But players that play that game they push through. They find all the language bits. They learn the controls of the thing. They learn to manage the the sun's gonna explode in 10 minutes thing, and then they love it. Even though Outer Wilds, I would say, is probably all the way on that side of the spectrum, because every element of that game is trying to confuse you and trying to force you to learn it in specific ways. But not that many games operate in that, and I think Outer Wilds is interesting because it's not a mainstream game, but it's certainly one of the most mainstream games with that level of just totally inundated with different kinds of design friction. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Majora's Mask is probably another good example.
Sure.
And part of the reason that I always bounce off of Majora's Mask whenever I try to play it is I can't buy in. Sure. Sometimes it's hard for me to buy into games. Yeah, well, actually, I think it's definitely true. I think that
kind of colors my general distaste for this, but the admittance that sometimes I can get through, and sometimes I can really enjoy it, because I look at my list of favorite games of all time, and the majority of them are ones where the learning curve, the friction level is relatively low, good onboarding, some hand holding, relatively linear, but that's not exclusive. I love Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Now, I don't like Dark Souls and Bloodborne because I die and lose all my souls, because the enemies hit like a fucking truck, because everything is very obtuse. I don't like those games for that reason. I like them for other reasons, but I was able to, I don't even really think about the fact that I'm playing Bloodborne and I'm constantly losing all my souls and then having to restart and go get them and all that, because I like Bloodborne.
Or actually, hold on, you're a fraud. Go back to the top of your list. What's your favorite game of all time?
Minecraft. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
That game is full of friction.
Absolutely it is.
That game doesn't teach you shit.
Yeah.
You guys it doesn't tell you the crafting recipe.
Yeah.
Well, it might now. I don't really play Minecraft
Yeah,
anymore.
it does. Yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah.
And even still, like when I was playing with Laurel, we ended up digging around for diamonds, and we found some sort of fucking abominable creature I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And it killed us, and we lost all of our shit.
Yeah.
Minecraft
is definitely absolutely.
Minecraft has more friction per square inch than
I would
most
say it's true.
games ever.
That's definitely true. And I think the reason why my brain doesn't register as that is because I learned all the friction of Minecraft when I was 9.
Yeah.
I learned how to craft all these things. I learned what the physics were. I learned the progression, the nonsense stuff of enchanting is ridiculous in Minecraft. How are you possibly supposed to learn how that works? Put the books in this order, and you have to click the things and get the certain amount of experience. And if you remove a couple of the bookcases, you can access that. It's ridiculous. It's fucking nonsense. But I learned all that when I was 9, and so to me, it's just base knowledge of Minecraft. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to mess up the enchanting table because I built 3,000 enchanting tables in my life. But you're right in that Minecraft, to a player that doesn't have this like inundated in their mind as just like default knowledge, Minecraft is absolutely full of that. It's a very punishing game. You lose all your stuff on death. The enemies are pretty difficult. The combat is kind of finicky.
Yeah.
It's a hard game. But I think Minecraft was an interesting one because that, to me, I was incentivized by social factors in order to learn it. Is I was playing it with my friends and they were teaching me, and I wanted to impress them with my knowledge, so I would go and watch videos and read the wiki. And so but if my friends had been super into Street Fighter, maybe Street Fighter would have been that for me.
I'm sure it would have been.
But I didn't know anyone that played fighting games when I was 9.
Oh, and again, this goes back to the personal point, which I think is the only point worth making. You don't play games now for the reason you played Minecraft when you were a kid.
That's definitely true.
You played Devil May Cry so you could beat it.
True.
You didn't play Devil May Cry to get good at Devil May Cry. And that's not a statement of value judgment.
It's just a fact.
That's just a fact.
Yes. And actually, it's something I'm proud of. It's a value judgment positive.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's just an essential point to make, ultimately. If friction is about slowing things down, ultimately, slowing down your progression of skill, whatever, then it's about if you have the patience to accept that or not.
Sure. Yeah. Now, the final comment, actually, quickly, there's one other comment. It's from Henry. It's like 2 sentences long. He says, this is Henry Dogma, by the way. Sure. He says,
Henry what?
Actually, I haven't done a video since I came back from my trip. I just spent a couple days with Henry. Apparently, he wants it to be pronounced Suma.
That's not going to happen.
No, but he's like, oh, then it would be funny if you say Suma. I'm like, no, it's actually Suma. It's a bad joke, frankly, but that's what Henry Suma.
Henry, I want you to brainstorm other ways you could spell that.
No, it's a bit. It's a bit. I'll talk to you off camera. Don't worry.
Okay.
Henry says, I usually find friction annoying, but there's some pretty cool stuff that's been done with it, like the inventory management system in Resident Evil games. If you're not familiar, the game requires you to fit all of your items in a grid-like system, and you can't take anything with you that doesn't fit. That's a good example.
That's a really good example.
I love managing my inventory in a Resident Evil game. That's a cool little puzzle. Yeah. It's very contextual. I find it very satisfying.
Because if there's one thing that's true about Leon Kennedy, it's that he's always carrying a big briefcase.
Yeah, you see it on his character model. Yeah, he's got his hand. Yeah, and it gets bigger over the course of the game.
Always carrying that big briefcase around.
Yep. 2 men with briefcases. Leon Kennedy and Ethan Winters. They love their briefcases. Now, do you want to read this final comment from Brendan?
Sure.
And we'll read this whole thing. It's not too long.
Yeah, it's perfect. What I appreciate about friction...
this is fiction, but we'll let it
I was trying to be helpful.
Nope. This is a frictionful video.
It's fair enough.
This is going against the player's instant gratification, which is getting through the video without us taking tangents and fucking up and revealing that our community members are fallible human beings.
I was trying to help the player. I was trying to be player helpful in this situation. What I appreciate about friction... If it feel better, here, I'll make you feel better here.
You're going to add the R?
I'll add the R.
Holy shit.
Fiction that's not the right suggestion.
It doesn't know.
This isn't worth it.
Keep going.
What I appreciate about friction is, when applied correctly, it forces players to engage with the game's mechanics and world in a deeper and more creative way, rather than simply steamrolling through.
Mm-hmm.
Steamrolling can be hella fun, don't get me wrong, but I find a lot of value and fun in overcoming an obstacle or challenge, so I seek out games that offer those experiences. Something that I've realized is that I also want friction outside of combat and dedicated puzzle sections, which is where most games tend to focus on all friction or difficulty.
That's true, yeah.
One area I'm particularly fond of friction is in navigation and resource management. For example, I like the rain and weapon durability in Breath of the Wild, the movement system in Death Stranding, and limited fast travel of Dragon's Dogma or Morrowind. I also really like it when games have minimal HUD or quest markers and use alternate forms of wayfinding, like needing to memorize directions in Morrowind or using context clues to track monster hunts in Final Fantasy 12 and 16.
Yeah, I mean, it actually brings up some other good examples. Death Stranding being a game that just moving around in that game is full of friction. You have to constantly be fighting. My boy Sam Porter Bridges. Is Porter like a nickname? This is middle name?
I think he just has 3 names.
Sure.
I mean, I wouldn't. You know what? I wouldn't pass Kojima.
Samuel. And Rain in Breath of the Wild being one that we actually didn't really talk about.
Rain, I think, is a better example than weapon durability.
Because it actually decreases the friction. It makes it slippery.
That's a great point.
Yeah. But it increases the friction in those moments is because you want to climb that mountain? Too bad it's raining. Suck it up. Find another path. Wait it out.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like this as a final comment.
Yeah. That it?
What I like about this as a final comment is because Brendan is really getting into the heart of the only thing that matters, which is how somebody feels about the topic.
Yeah.
And I agree with him. This idea of finding value and fun in overcoming obstacles or challenges.
Yeah.
It's part of the reason why I play so much Halo.
Sure.
You know, because
those are challenging games to play. Let me tell you.
Well, it's actually an interesting point, right? Because when you played Halo 3 and you're playing on lowest difficulty, you had a lot of criticisms about things like the weapons in the game.
Yeah.
That I think are simply not true when you're playing on higher difficulty and you have to really engage with the challenge in front of you.
Definitely.
Now, that's a whole different thing about maybe Halo needs to balance for lower difficulty better, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
Hopefully 343 takes notes for the campaign marathon. Oh,
wait, what?
There's no campaign marathon.
343 is making marathon? No, that's Bungie.
Sorry, I meant to say Bungie in the first place because Bungie made Halo 3.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that.
I did know that. Yes.
It's just that Microsoft has done such a good job making me think of 343 Industries when I think of Halo.
Yes.
They've won.
Yeah.
What was I saying? I like that. I like when I'm playing Halo, combat evolved, and I get a bad checkpoint, and my health is low, and I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And I gotta fucking figure it out. Or I'm playing Devil May Cry, and I have to redo 5 minutes of a mission because the big spider guy killed me again.
Sure.
Actually, he didn't. He's pretty easy. The dogs are much harder to fight. That's another sidebar. The dog's actually not hard when you learn how to fight the dog, but I didn't know how to fight the dog for a while.
Yeah.
To me, that's really fun. I enjoy a lot of games like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this goes back to the skill conversation that we were having. Actually goes back to a conversation we had last summer that I actually just rewatched, and so it's on my mind, which is why we love the games that we do in terms of different styles of game design being appealing to you or not. Because a lot of the things that you or Brendan might share as some of the most engaging and fun moments of a game that you played are the exact moments in which I would become frustrated and disengaged and my star rating would go down on a game of getting a quote unquote bad checkpoint in something like Halo 1 and feeling like, well, okay, I would be able to continue forward if only the checkpoint didn't save me in this exact place for seemingly no reason.
Right.
And then I die a lot of time.
That's also probably not friction. That's just bad checkpointing.
Yeah, that's true for that one. But a lot of these elements, again, it comes down to the personal taste of enjoyability or not, or where you're what you gain out of playing games, like what engages you, is because it does not engage me to overcome that kind of challenge. And I think I'll need to think a little bit more on why something like getting better at Halo doesn't engage me, but where I would want to get really good at something like Ori, where those are both games that would require you to master a certain type of skill set in order to progress. And especially actually Ori 1 is a very interesting game because that game has a very specific type of friction of you have to set your own checkpoints. You have a limited resource that you plop down checkpoint, and There's no other checkpoints in the game. You have to do it yourself, but Ori and the Blind Forest, one of my favorite games of all time. And I consider that an element of friction because most games help you along by auto-saving after certain sections, and that game doesn't. But that's something I'll wrestle with off camera. Me and that topic are going to be rolling around the floor. Yeah. You're going to hear it in the middle of the night. But friction is, again, coming back to what I was trying to say at the beginning, is not an inherently negative thing. Yeah. It is not the things that annoy players. It might be the design elements that annoy the majority of players or a certain kind of players, but it's not inherently a negative thing. It might be to me. It might be that elements that people consider friction are the things that push me away from games that I don't enjoy in game design. But obviously, through certain elements in games that you enjoy, through the entire point of Brendan's channel, games with high friction can be very, very engaging and very appealing to certain demographics. I'm not going to point any fingers.
I mean, playing Dragon's Dogma, one of my major praises of Dragon's Dogma was that the world itself doesn't really agree with you.
Sure.
It just sort of exists. And you really have to be careful about where you walk, and you have to be careful about how you plan your route. If there's going to be camps, if you lose your pawns, are you screwed? Do you have your camping kit with you? Sure, it's like the game's asked me to march a long way back to Vernworth Castle when I'm over in Batal or something. Yeah. But for me, I just enjoy the sights because I'm like, man, this is just like being outside.
Yeah,
like the fucking the forest by my house in Maine. Wasn't designed by God to allow me to traverse it easily.
Yeah,
right. So I think that again, it's ultimately about. I think it goes back to Murph's point of being able to meet a game where it's going to be. Sure. And if you can't meet it there, you're just not going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And there's a lot of games I can't meet on their level like that. I can't meet Sekiro on its level, for example.
Yeah. Satisfying conversation. Hope you guys learned something. Continue the conversation about friction in the comments. Again, go subscribe to The Crawl if you want to learn more about these kind of games that that feature these kind of mechanics very heavily. And go support Brendan on Patreon so you can join his server.
You should.
Where everyone in that server is just as big a sicko as him, except for me. Sometimes I find that alienating. It's high friction server, but if you're that kind of sicko, it's home. It's home, baby.
We support Brendan Hess on
I do. I give him my money. Too. I give him the money that I don't make from BLB.
I give Brendan an amount that I chose a while ago and gets auto-drawn out of my account every
month.
Yes. On a date that I don't know or remember, but frankly, I want him to have it.
Yes.
So there we go.
That's the moral of the story. Go give Brendan Hess your money.
It's really grown on me. I usually drink chocolate or vanilla. The rule of thumb is usually you don't deviate from chocolate or vanilla when it comes to protein powder.
Or what?
Well, it tastes like shit.
I see.
Because even the chocolate and vanilla is like an approximation of the flavor of chocolate or vanilla.
Of course, yes. And you can definitely taste that with like the bars that are meant to be like, this is so much protein, but they just end up tasting like chalky and like...
Yeah. So this is strawberry.
Sure.
Which I was like, strawberry milk's pretty good. A little change because I'm only drinking chocolate. For the first 2 or 3 days, I'm like, this literally makes me feel ill to drink.
Yeah. But you push through. Friction. Your protein powder, strawberry friction. You came out the other side. You're like Brendan Hess. You're a sicko. You hate yourself. You want pain. And now, pleasure on the other side.
Yeah, now it's actually pretty fucking good. I just had to persist.
Strawberry protein powder is the wizardry of shakes.
There's also a mutton flavor powder I don't want to try.
Not true. Not true. That's fake. That's a lie. Fake lies. Realize.
I don't get it.
You don't remember that?
From what?
Jaden Smith. It's a Jaden Smith tweet from like 2008 or something like that. And it's real eyes.
Sure.
Realize.
Yeah.
Real lies.
Oh dear.
Realize.
Sure. Yeah, that does strike me as something that Jaden Smith would say.
In like 2008.
That's true. Well, to be honest, Jaden Smith would say that now, too.
What's Jaden Smith up to?
He's rapping.
Whoever heard of Jaden Smith passed after Earth. And then, actually, here's the thing. I think Schrodinger's a fucking idiot. Because if there's no meows, there's no cat. I'll be honest. If a cat is in the box, it's gonna fucking meow. Why didn't Schroeder even consider that? How many cats do you think he put in boxes?
He's too busy playing the piano for Lucy.